With Scream 3 being the one chapter in the franchise where the killer worked entirely on their own, there's always been speculation on whether or not they could have had an accomplice. And considering the production's starting draft did include a second Ghostface reveal, a lot of the footage we see in the finished movie was filmed to reflect that intended script. So in this video, we're going to break down all of the appearances of Ghostface in Scream 3 to see where there could have been a second killer and which character that would have been. What is up, Scream team? Zach Cherry here. Guys, I started this channel because I'm a huge horror geek, and if you're like me, you might want to consider hitting that subscribe button and turning on those bell notifications so you can stay up to date with all my latest videos. Now, before we get into the meat of this, I just want to let you guys know that I had no intention at all of making a Scream 3 episode in this Which Ghostface Killed Who series. However, a lot of you guys were asking me in the comments on my last video if I was going to be covering Scream 3. I imagine that most of you were probably joking when you left those comments, but after giving this some thought, I realized that there actually was a video to be made here. Since Ehren Kruger's original Scream 3 script did include a second Ghostface killer in the character of Angelina Tyler, many scenes had already been filmed that corresponded with this detail. And because of that, production began with the crew and actress Emily Mortimer under the impression that she would be Roman's accomplice and girlfriend. There's no way of pinpointing exactly where during production the second killer was dropped, since rather than writing a complete revision, they only had time to rewrite individual scenes as they went along, which typically happened on the day they were set to be shot. So just for shits and gigs, toss this video a thumbs up and meet me in the comment section down below to let me know where you think Ghostface would have been Roman and where it would have been Angelina. The film opens with Cotton Weary stuck in LA traffic, where he's called by a sexy sounding mystery woman, whose voice then changes into the even sexier sounding Ghostface, voiced as always by the steadfast Roger L. Jackson. I wish I could say that this was Angelina calling, but the concept of the multi-voice modulator was always written into the story from the outset. In the initial opening scene, which was filmed but unused, Cotton arrives home to find his apartment completely empty. He then hears the shower turn on, and after investigating the noise, he receives a phone call from the killer, disguising himself in the voice of Christine, who tells him that she's waiting for him at the cafe down the street. He tells her to call the police and then hangs up and continues searching the apartment. A few moments later, the killer calls back, still using Christine's voice, letting him know that she's on her way home, despite his protests for her to stay away. While he's having this conversation, someone in the apartment turns on the stereo to remind us of this movie's promotional soundtrack. As Cotton goes to turn off the music, the killer on the phone as Christine tells him she's just running up the stairs and instructs him to retrieve a baseball bat from the hall closet. As Cotton does this, Christine's lifeless body falls out onto him and Ghostface runs in through the main entrance, stabbing Cotton to death. This scene was then changed to appear closer to the version we got in the finished film, the only difference being Cotton trying to escape out of a skylight in his office. Both of these versions can be found on the DVD. However, the final version was reshot well after principal filming was completed, so it is consistent with the idea of Roman being the only killer. And we can see here in the finished version of this scene that Roman was the one who killed both Christine and Cotton. But in the original scene that was shot, it would seem as though Angelina was already inside the apartment when Cotton arrived, had possibly killed Christine and hidden her body, and lured Cotton around by creating distractions as he talked on the phone with Roman, who then would have run up the stairwell and killed him. Since Christine's death in this version was off screen, there's no way of knowing for sure whether it was Roman or Angelina who killed her, but as far as Cotton's kill is concerned, it seems as though the killer who was on the phone was the one who did the deed. If we look back at my breakdowns for the first two movies, the evidence suggests that the phone calls were always made by the killer who was more so the mastermind of the operation, with Billy being the caller in Scream 1 and Mrs. Loomis being the caller in Scream 2. There was one instance where Stu called Sidney at Tatum's house while Billy was in jail, but that aside, I'm going to apply this same logic here and say that Roman still would have been the one making the phone calls throughout the movie had Angelina still been his partner. This would then indicate to us that Roman was always intended to be the one who murdered Cotton in every version of this scene. Moving ahead to Sarah Darling's murder, there is a lot more room for interpretation here, thanks to an extended version of this scene, which sees her arriving on the Sunrise Studios lot and going through security. In the finished film, we do hear a strange noise after she gets out of her car, at which point she looks back before continuing on up the stairs. In the extended scene, this was then followed by a POV shot of the killer, watching her as she entered the Stab production offices. Based on how the scene goes down, if there were two killers involved at this point in filming, I would imagine that Roman once again would have been the one who made the phone call. We know that the killer calls Sarah in Roman's real voice before he changes it to the traditional Ghostface voice. But it would make sense for Roman to be the caller here, as he obviously wouldn't need to emulate his own voice with any device. If you consider the killer's POV shot from the rooftop of the adjacent building, that might suggest that Roman acted as a lookout to know when Sarah would arrive and know exactly when to call her, as well as see if anyone else was coming or going from the office, as we can see was the case with several other characters. So while the finished film suggests Roman was probably hiding in and making the phone call from the props room, we can see in the original edit that one killer would have to have been outside, while the second killer was already camped out inside. And if Roman was the one making the calls from outside of the building, the Ghostface hiding in the props room who ends up killing Sarah would therefore have to have been Angelina. Now, what is probably the biggest plot hole in this entire movie comes next, and that is of course the scene in which the killer finally calls Sidney's home. The reason why this scene makes absolutely no sense whatsoever is because for the first third of the movie, Roman has no idea where Sidney is or how to draw her out. This is a huge part of why Sidney is hidden in isolation in the first place, and why even Detective Kincaid is unable to track her down. So it makes very little sense that all of a sudden Roman now has access to her phone number and is able to call her. I know there's a throwaway line later on about him possibly being able to monitor the calls from a scanner, but then why go through all the trouble of asking Cotton where Sidney was? If he could have gotten her number this whole time, you can cut out the first 30 minutes of this movie easy. But this wouldn't be a proper Zach Cherry video if I didn't overanalyze the shit out of it. So we're gonna do our best to patch up this plot hole by looking at the scene which directly follows this one. And that of course is the Stab 3 rap party at Jennifer's bungalow, which seems to be occurring at the same time, or shortly thereafter from when Roman calls Sidney. Now, thanks to some expositional dialogue from Gale, we learn that Roman was cleared and released by the police, so he wouldn't have been in custody for long, making it entirely plausible for him to have been able to call Sidney. We know that the only person who has Sidney's number is Dewey, but other than Jennifer and Detective Kincaid, there's no point in the movie where we see any other character use his cell phone. However, with Dewey living on Jennifer's property and Angelina being present at the house at the same time, we could grasp at straws here and conjecture that at some point during the party, she may have had an opportunity to get Dewey's phone, find Sid's number, and send it to Roman. It is a bit of a stretch, but judging by the timeline of that night, it does offer the most logical explanation to fill in this gap. With everything that goes down next, I do find one has to suspend disbelief quite a bit in order to buy the fact that Roman was able to get so much done in this scene, as there were a lot of lucky coincidences. I mean, he kills the bodyguard, turns on the gas stove in the kitchen, remotely sends script pages to Jennifer's fax machine from his phone. I don't even know how that technology works today, let alone in the year 2000. Then, he has everything line up perfectly, only to be in the exact spot where Gale ends up landing after her fall. And he's able to do all of that completely undetected by the 6 people who were present at the house. Now, if we rewind and look at the same scenario over again, but through the lens of Angelina being the second killer, it's still a lot of lucky coincidences, but it does make this a little more feasible. Continuing with the logic of Roman being the primary caller, we can place him in Dewey's trailer, where he waits for Stone to come around during his perimeter check. When Stone gets close enough, Roman calls him using Dewey's voice, and attacks him once he's inside the close confines of the mobile home. Meanwhile, Angelina, who's shown to be coming and going multiple times throughout the scene, likely would have been the one to turn on the gas stove in the kitchen. She also wouldn't need to change into the Ghostface costume to do this, as she's an invited party guest and would be able to move around the house inconspicuously, whereas Roman would have likely been spotted if he attempted to do this, with or without the costume. With Roman having dispatched the bodyguard outside, he now cuts the power to the house and faxes the script to Jennifer's machine before making his way down the canyon. Hold on, the power was out, but the fax machine still worked? I am seriously trying wrong with this movie. Since this would have been a team effort for both Roman and Angelina, I'm going to credit each one of them with Tom's murder, since Angelina set the trap and Roman offered the bait. It should be noted here that Angelina does have the foresight to know to break away from the rest of the group before the explosion, and has likely gotten far enough away from the blast radius that we don't even see her anywhere near the others as they're running away from the flying debris and then falling down the hill. This hints to us that there could have been premeditation on her part. Meanwhile, Roman, who has been waiting at the side of the road, jumps out at Gale before getting shot by Dewey and making a quick getaway. Angelina, who likely walked down the hill safely from a far distance, emerges on the road and evades Dewey's question of how she got all the way over there by feigning hysteria over Tom's death. The next time we see Ghostface is when Sid visits the Woodsboro set. Originally, this setting was meant to be used for the climax of the film before it was changed to the mansion, and this scene instead just involves Sidney getting attacked by both Ghostface killers in the washroom. And when I say both Ghostface killers, I mean they didn't even try to hide the fact that there was two of them, as they both appear on screen together at the same time. However, when the scene was rewritten to have Sidney visit the actual set and move the climax to the mansion, I'm pretty sure that they were still working under the assumption that there would be two killers, because this is the only point in the movie where it is so obvious that there's more than one of them. The only way to justify that this was Roman working alone is to accept Randy's rules of the trilogy to be true, meaning Roman really is superhuman and does possess those Jason Voorhees teleportation powers. But because this is a Scream movie and is rooted in real life, there is no natural way he could have moved around like this, even if he knew the Stab 3 set like the back of his hand. So what I imagine happens here is after Sidney's exchange with Angelina in the washroom, she lures Sidney out onto the set. Once Sid gets there, Angelina, now in Ghostface costume, follows her into the house and stands off by the side of the bedroom door, which Sidney has jammed shut. As Angelina tests the door, Sidney backs into the window, where Roman jumps up, grabbing her and pulling her through. During this scuffle, Angelina hides in the closet by the front door, so when Sidney enters the house again, she's able to surprise attack her as she lunges out and chases her up the stairs, Stu Macher style, where Sidney's able to slow her down using fake plants and production equipment. She then pulls Angelina through the fake door, throwing her down onto the bed. At this point, Angelina runs off while Roman has made his way into the crime scene bedroom and uses Maureen's voice to summon Sidney. He then raises up with the bloody sheet over top of him and frightens Sidney right out the window, taking off before anyone realizes what's happening. Angelina, who's now had enough time to regroup with the others, conveniently shows up and continues to play the sweet young ingenue act in order to avoid suspicion on her part. We finally see Roman again at Milton's office, talking about his career. I honestly don't know why he's in this scene, other than the fact that this movie needed to remind us that he's still a character in it. But I imagine he was probably listening through the door after he left the room, so he could hear how much Gale, Dewey, and Jennifer knew, and presumably waited around for Milton to leave his office so he could kidnap him and take him back to the mansion. By the time everyone arrives at the party, Roman and Angelina are the two people who are the most eager to break up the group, as Roman goes off exploring with Jennifer, while Angelina goes off with Tyson. If the idea still was that there were two killers, this could suggest that they were both pulling a disappearing act so they could re-emerge as their Ghostface alter egos, with Angelina eluding Tyson through the secret passageway and Roman faking his death for the others to find him. But with Angelina then revealing to us that she did ultimately get the role of Sidney Prescott by sleeping with Milton, it pretty much clears her name and cements her fate, as this is the moment where she checks out of the movie. There will be some of you who are convinced that Angelina was still working with Roman, despite this revelation never being made apparent on screen. And honestly, I can't fault you for that. Patrick Lussier even says in the audio commentary that Angelina's body was mysteriously pulled away to leave us wondering what happened to her. And if you really want to get conspiracy theory here, the Ultimate Scream Collection DVD booklet has a list of all the deaths from each movie in the trilogy, and for some reason, Emily Mortimer is suspiciously not included as part of the RIP Scream 3 cast list. There's no telling where Angelina would have taken off to after this, but there is a bizarro Scream universe out there in which Angelina was a Ghostface and not only got away with it, but went completely undetected by the audience as well. Let me know what you guys think of the idea that Angelina was the second possible killer. If you're looking for more content, you can check out my Patreon account right here, which includes weekly commentaries and early access to videos just like this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys. I've been Zach Cherry, and I'll be right back.